straightforward.
Newly obtained images of a heartbreaking encounter at the southern border. A young boy alone, tears streaming down his face, approaching a Border Patrol agent, telling him he has been abandoned by his group and he's scared. Building a police firewall, now 9 officers testifying against their former colleague Derek Chauvin tonight as the brother of George Floyd is expressing confidence a conviction is coming. Preventing a spring surge to ensure a sweet summer is around the corner. Dr. Fauci tonight says he would travel this summer with his family, but only if cases go down and more people get vaccinated. Police respond to an active shooter near a Maryland fort. A Navy medic allegedly opening fire, critically wounding 2 people at a business park. The gunman then drives through a gate at the base, confronted by armed military personnel. News on the suspect is coming in. The growing culture war tonight facing transgender youth. Does being inclusive create an advantage? Our in-depth report.
Where would you be without running?
I don't know. I feel like it's a core part of who I am. So it wouldn't really be the same.
And Lil Nas X's new milestone, back at #1 on the Billboard, but creating a new controversy with a new kind of satanic panic. But what's really behind the provocative imagery? Good evening, everyone. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thank you so much for streaming with us. 7 days into the trial of former police officer Derek Chauvin, we begin with the number 9. That's how many of Chauvin's former colleagues have taken the stand to testify against him. The 3 who took the witness stand today, all condemning Chauvin's conduct. The sergeant who leads the department's crisis intervention training, a course Chauvin took, testifying today, once Floyd stopped offering resistance, it was time for Chauvin to de-escalate. A use of force expert who has conducted roughly 2,500 reviews of use of force during his career, telling jurors, in his opinion, the force was excessive. The defense, all the while, trying to plant a seed of doubt in the minds of the jurors that a hostile crowd made it difficult for Chauvin to focus and that Floyd may have died because of drugs. But tonight, Floyd's brother appeared outside the courthouse expressing confidence that a conviction is coming. Once again, our Alex Perez leads us off from Minneapolis.
Prosecutors today building a wall of police witnesses, trying to convince the jury former officer Derek Chauvin used excessive force against George Floyd and failed to help him when he became unresponsive. Sergeant Kerr Yang, who leads the department's crisis intervention training, testifies Chauvin was taught to de-escalate crises. He took a 40-hour course in 2016.
Is it possible for a police officer to use this critical thinking model in the field when when events are unfolding quickly?
It is possible. To rehearse and reusing this model, it will almost be like, it could be almost like memory. And when we talk about fast evolving situations, I know that they do exist, they do happen, but a lot of the time, converse of that is that a lot of the time, we have the time to slow things down and reevaluate, reassess, and go through this model.
Lieutenant Johnny Mersel, a use of force expert, shown this picture and making it clear Chauvin crossed a line.
Sir, is this an MPD trained neck restraint?
No, sir.
Has it ever been?
Not to my neck restraint, no, sir.
Once a subject is under control and no longer resistant, it's inappropriate to hold them in a position where you're draping your knee across their back or neck, isn't it?
I would say it's time to de-escalate for us, sir.
Would it be appropriate and within training to hold a subject in that prone restrained position with a knee on the neck and a knee on the back for an extended period of time after the subject has stopped offering any resistance?
No, sir.
Or has lost their pulse?
No, sir.
Officer Nicole McKenzie coordinates medical support services for the department. Prosecutors using her to counter the defense argument Chauvin wouldn't have known Floyd was in distress because he was still talking.
You train officers that if a person can talk, that means that they can breathe?
No, sir.
Okay. Why not?
There's a possibility that somebody could be in respiratory distress and still being able to verbalize it. Just because they're speaking doesn't mean they're breathing adequately.
The defense team argues the crowd that gathered around the officers created a distraction and a threat.
Have you ever had to perform emergency services in not even a hostile crowd, just a loud, excited crowd?
Yes.
Is that, in your experience, more or less difficult?
It's incredibly difficult.
It can be distracting.
Absolutely.
And so does it make it more difficult to assess a patient?
It does.
Does it make it more likely that you may miss signs that a patient is experiencing something?
Yes.
Okay. And so the distraction can actually harm the potential care of the patient?
Yes.
9 Minneapolis police witnesses have already testified against Chauvin, including the department's chief, Madera Arredondo.
But you know, Lord,
Today, Floyd's family praying outside the court, closely following every second of the proceedings. His brother sounding confident they'll get justice.
it's like trying to squeeze water out of a rock right now. But my family, we have the faith as small as a mustard seed. We're going to get through this.
Amen.
But one thing I can tell you, me and Ms. Gwen Carr, after we get the verdict and we get this conviction, we'll be able to breathe.
Floyd family feeling confident about a conviction. Alex Perez joins us now from Minneapolis. Alex, in addition to those 9 Minneapolis police officers who've testified, prosecutors are now also bringing in expert witnesses from other police departments.
Yeah, Lindsay, they're bringing in outside experts to testify. A sergeant with the Los Angeles Police Department taking the stand today. He said Chauvin's actions were excessive. The prosecution is really trying to hammer home that what Chauvin did is not what officers are trained to do. Lindsay?
And Alex, so far, 7 days into this trial, and demonstrations and rallies outside the courthouse seem to have stayed largely peaceful.
Yeah, Lindsay, there are a number of demonstrations or demonstrators here every day, but they all have remained peaceful. The number sort of fluctuates. There's down the street here a demonstration plaza of sorts where people tend to gather today. Benjamin Crump, the family attorney, the Floyd family attorney, and George Floyd's brother met with some of those people out there. Most of them say they're here just because they want to show support for the Floyd family. But things have remained peaceful here, Lindsay, and testimony with those experts resumes tomorrow morning. Lindsay?
Alex Perez, our thanks to you. And for more analysis of the trial, we bring in Shauna Lloyd, a civil rights attorney with the Cochran firm in Florida. Thanks so much for joining us, Shauna. Let's start with what we heard today from Officer Nicole McKenzie, who does medical support for the police department. She said that someone can be in respiratory distress and still speak, but she also admitted that surrounding chaos can make it difficult to assess someone's medical needs. Would you say her testimony accomplish, and could it have cut both ways?
Her testimony absolutely cut both ways. She gave the defense a little nugget in the fact that she admitted that a crowd can be distracting when you're looking to administer aid. She also gave the prosecution something when she said someone can be speaking but still be in respiratory distress. So she gave a little nugget to each side. Although I will say, and I think some people will think that she is talking about medical aid that an EMT is going to give because that is her training. An officer is really looking for vitals and performing CPR. So there is a little bit of a difference, but she definitely gave them a nugget.
We also heard about how the Minneapolis police trains their officers and that the use of force should be proportionate to the threat. How clear-cut is this in real life, both for police officers in the field and for jurors when they have to decide if an officer acted lawfully under unique circumstances?
It's definitely not a clear-cut theory, although the graph makes it easy to understand. In minute by minute, when you're replaying a lot of videos in these types of cases and instances, it's not very clear. It is very murky. And typically, historically, jurors have given the benefit of the doubt to the law enforcement officer if there is one on the table. This particular case has a lot more clear video, so it'll be very interesting to see how the jurors side on this.
A key witness could be Maurice Hall, the passenger who was in Floyd's car the day that he died. The defense wants his testimony, but Hall is threatening to invoke his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. Do you think that we'll hear from him? And if so, what might we learn?
It's a curious thing that he is going to invoke his Fifth Amendment right, because typically if a state wants them to offer, they'll cut some sort of a deal. It looks like they have not offered one, and he is not going to incriminate himself. The defense is looking to have him come in because he can directly testify to the drug use that may have occurred in the car, that may have been happening. So this is something that the defense wants in if possible. But if he's not going to testify, we're not going to get a lot in, because the judge wants to be sure that he is not going to take the fifth in front of the jury, because that can leave that question unnecessarily about what's happening, and the jury can feel like there's something more behind why he's taking the fifth.
Any indication just yet, and you may not know this, but the likelihood that he will testify?
As it stands right now, I don't believe he'll testify if he's not offered immunity. And so far, it seems as though the state is not offering it to him, so I do not expect him to testify.
Anything in particular?
Unless it's on a very narrow scope.
That they would only ask very limited questions.
Correct.
Anything that struck you in particular today or in the past 7 days that you feel like this was really a significant moment?
They're all significant in different ways, because this case is so out of the norm of what we see in these types of police abuse cases. All of the law enforcement that's testifying, we're seeing a crumbling in the blue wall where they are actually standing as one voice to say, this is not a representative of our training, of our culture. That is a significant departure from what we've seen in these cases. We have people that have trained with Chauvin that have known him for 20 years, that when she looked at the pose couldn't identify what move that was. That's a very significant, impactful little note that I think the jury is going to take notice of. And of course, our bystanders are very significant, because they were there looking to get aid to Mr. George Floyd, and that the police officers did not respond in any format to those cries of help.
Shauna Lloyd, our thanks to you.
Thank you.
And now we bring in Greg Hessnes, who spent nearly 3 decades with the Minneapolis Police Department in various roles, including Deputy Police Chief. Thank you so much for joining us, Chief. We've now heard numerous members of your former department testify that Derek Chauvin did not follow authorized police practices. Police Inspector Katie Blackwell, for example, called Chauvin's kneeling position, quote, improvised. But speak to us about police training versus real-world responses. Did you see officers go rogue sometimes, and does the defense have a point that a suspect can sometimes become more dangerous?
You know, but it's got to be realistic. I mean, in that, sure, you know, if you're fighting for your life, you may have to improvise something, but that's not what I saw there.
What was your reaction when you first saw the video?
Honestly, when I first saw the video from one side of the street, all I saw was Chauvin and Mr. Floyd. And I thought, well, maybe he's all by himself, or maybe there's a hostile crowd. But then I saw a video from the other side, and he had 3 people helping him, and the later audio revealed there wasn't much hostility in the crowd. So I couldn't explain why he was doing what he was doing for so long.
A Minneapolis police lieutenant testified today that officers are trained in the concept of proportionality, that is, to use the lowest level of force possible to control a suspect and to de-escalate when the suspect stops resisting. How much was that emphasized when you were on the police force, and how do you think that Chauvin should or could have handled this encounter with George Floyd?
Well, I think about the time I left, we were just at the birthplace of crisis intervention training and de-escalation and that sort of thing. But according to training records, Chauvin had both de-escalation in service, and as well as the 40-hour crisis intervention curriculum. So I didn't see him using any of that.
That lieutenant also said that a neck restraint was authorized at the time under certain circumstances. Is that a technique that you've ever used? And can you give us an example of when a neck restraint might have been appropriate, if ever?
Well, I don't think that exact usage of having a knee on somebody's carotid, you know, at all, much less for that period of time, was ever taught or authorized. We used to teach something called a lateral vascular restraint, where if you were behind somebody, you could sort of close off their carotid until they stopped resisting. When might that be useful? If you're all by yourself and you're fighting for your life, or somebody was much bigger than you and no help, maybe if you thought you needed to do that to save your life.
Do you anticipate the defense having strong arguments when it's their turn to present their case and call witnesses? And do you think that Derek Chauvin has any allies at this point?
I think there are a number of officers who are just saying, let this guy have his day in court and let it be a fair trial. But I haven't heard anybody actually saying they think he was right.
Are you one of those officers that's feeling let him have his day in court? Do you think at all, do you ever put your mind in, boy, if I were a juror, I would be on the fence at this point, or what is your thought?
Well, the evidence so far has been very persuasive to me, and I think sitting in the courtroom and seeing the witnesses as humans face to face, it's got to be very persuasive to them.
Chief, thank you so much for your time and insight. We really appreciate it.
Okay, my pleasure. Good to meet you. Bye.
Today, President Biden moved up his deadline for opening up vaccines for all adults to April 19th, and not a moment too soon with cases spiking, particularly among the young and unvaccinated. Eva Pilgrim has more.
Tonight, a new cause for alarm across this country in the race between the vaccine and the variants. Doctors inside Beaumont Hospital in Michigan say they're facing a surge all over again.
Just a steep incline in the numbers of patients that are coming in who are really sick. We've got patients who are holding in the emergency room waiting for beds to open up.
As many as 70% of the new cases in Michigan could be from the more contagious and likely more deadly UK variant.
We're seeing a lot more younger adults, middle-aged adults being affected, getting sick and coming in.
Pedro Gonzalez was a healthy 28-year-old before COVID. One of his passions was highlighting small businesses trying to make it through the pandemic.
Just getting that big satisfaction out of knowing that you were able to help somebody in need.
But in March, Pedro tested positive for COVID. He's been on a ventilator for 2.5 weeks.
I thought he was going to be fine. I was, he'll be fine in a few days. He's young, he's strong. Nothing's going to happen. But after seeing his situation now, I just want people to be careful, to take care of themselves.
His 27-year-old brother, Rafael, now infected with COVID too. Cases among the young and unvaccinated are growing. Late today, President Biden moving up his deadline for states to make all Americans eligible for the vaccine to April 19th, 2 weeks earlier than he had promised.
In every part of this country, every adult over the age of 18 or older will be eligible to be vaccinated. No more confusing rules. No more confusing restrictions.
37 states already opening vaccinations to everyone 16 and older. But the president warning the country is only halfway through the vaccination effort.
We can have a safe, happy 4th of July with your family and your friends in small groups in your backyard. The real question is, how much death, disease, and misery are we going to see between now and then?
About 80% of teachers, school staff, and child care workers have already received at least their first vaccine shot. But the CDC is warning about outbreaks among the young, many tied to youth sports and extracurricular activities.
We're seeing more and more young people get into serious trouble, namely severe disease requiring hospitalization, and occasionally even tragic deaths.
Some of that concern now shifting to the youngest among us. And Eva Pilgrim joins us from Michigan now, where cases have been on the rise. And Eva, today we heard Dr. Fauci provide some more context on whether we are in fact experiencing a surge. What did he have to say?
Well, Dr. Fauci basically said that we're in a very critical moment, warning that we could just as easily swing up into a surge, making it very clear that we are in a race to get vaccines into arms before another peak happens, Lindsay.
And Eva, on the vaccine front, we're learning more about some serious setbacks for this AstraZeneca vaccine. What do you know about that?
Well, there have been a lot of discussions about this AstraZeneca vaccine and potential blood clots. It's a question that has hung over it. There was a small number of cases in their trials. That's a question that has to be answered because this vaccine is supposed to be going to places in the world that currently don't have access to a vaccine. It is one that experts now are really closely examining. Lindsay.
Eva, thanks so much. Next to the shooting by a Navy medic near Fort Detrick in Maryland, police say the alleged gunman fired on 2 of his co-workers, leaving one in critical condition. Then he drove to Fort Detrick, making it a half-mile onto the base before he was shot and killed. ABC's Rachel Scott is on the scene with the very latest.
Tonight, the terrifying moments in and around Fort Detrick Army Base in Frederick, Maryland.
All units, 1043, city is operating on an active shooter event.
Authorities say this is where the gunman, a Navy medic, opened fire with a rifle around 8 a.m. this morning.
I have a male subject in an Army-type suit.
Carrying a long rifle.
Shooting and critically wounding 2 sailors working at a naval biological research facility within an office at this business park. Those 2 victims airlifted to a Baltimore hospital. Tonight, one still fighting for his life. The other released just moments ago.
Is there any indication that the suspect knew these victims?
That's something that our authorities are looking into to find out the relationships, why it began here.
A naval spokesperson telling ABC News the victims were co-workers with the alleged gunman, identified as 38-year-old Fantahun Guillermo Wilcetabet. Minutes after the shooting, the suspect fled to Fort Detrick Army Base where he was assigned, speeding past a checkpoint and taking out his rifle. He was shot and killed by military personnel. Tonight, the FBI now on scene surrounding the suspect's home, still searching for a motive.
Has a violent incident like this ever happened before on the base?
Not to this magnitude. Not that I'm aware of, not to this magnitude on Fort Detrick. But in light of what's happened, certainly across the country, we were about as well prepared for it as we could.
Rachel Scott joins us now. Rachel, authorities say that they took some quick action to help alert base security and prevent this from potentially getting a lot worse.
Yeah, Lindsay, authorities say that warning really allowed them to act fast. Within just minutes, authorities were able to corner that suspect. He was later shot and then killed. And tonight, a lieutenant telling me that they train for these active shooter scenarios. He says now, though, they are happening all too often. They will be having even more extensive training next week, Lindsay.
Yeah, all too often for sure. And authorities say that they're still searching for a motive. But do we know anything else about the suspect and the victims?
Yeah, not too much about the suspect right now. We were actually just outside of his home just minutes ago. I did speak to one lieutenant outside. He said that his wife and his son, his child, was taken in for questioning. They're still learning more about his motives. It's still unclear tonight. But what we do know is that he was co-workers with those victims. I asked authorities repeatedly if this was a targeted attack. But right now, we just do not know the answer to that question, Lindsay.
Still too early to know. Rachel Scott, our thanks to you. When we come back, the incredible images, a dangerous rescue in the high seas, a cargo ship in danger of capsizing, some crew members jumping overboard. Rapper Lil Nas X sending a message to his haters following the controversy over those Satan shoes and his new music video. Publicity stunt, or is he sending a bigger message? But up next, so many state houses targeting trans athletes with new restrictive laws. But do trans athletes have an unfair advantage on the playing field? We'll hear from people on both sides of this issue next.
With so much at stake, so much on the line, more Americans turn here than any other newscast. ABC News World News Tonight with David Muir.
We have made it through another week together.
America's #1 most watched newscast across all of television.
Admit it, these days, what you need to know
seems to change just about every day.
What is it that you really want to know, need to know?
To help you not just get through your day,
but to make the most of it. Feel smarter.
Feel better.
Feel happier.
Well, how about a third hour of Good Morning America in the afternoon?
GMA 3, what you need to know. Lunchtime at 1 Eastern, 12 Central and Pacific on ABC. It's all about you.
Robin Roberts, George Stephanopoulos, Michael Strahan. Wake up with America's #1 most watched morning show. ABC's
Good Morning America.
The world may feel out of your control, but your happiness doesn't have to be. Learn the secrets to happiness. Listen to the 10% Happier podcast, free on Apple Podcasts.
ABC News honored winner for the second straight year with the Edward R. Murrow Award for Overall Excellence in Television. ABC News, America's #1 news source. News. Friday nights, 9/8 Central. True crime, cinematic, real-life drama, stunning, the unthinkable. Follow the clues. The Hunt. True crime. 2020. Friday nights, 9/8 Central on ABC.
The reality is our country can collapse from within.
You see the white power movement on the march. Klansmen and neo-Nazis, skinheads, it's meant to incite war.
From the KKK to Oklahoma City to Charlottesville, the new documentary event special.
We just need to start talking about race.
Homegrown Hate, the war among us.
This is a real wake-up call.
Streaming now on ABC News Live.
Now, when it matters most, the straightforward facts. ABC News is America's #1 news. #1 in the morning, #1 in the evening, with America's most watched newscast. #1 in late night versus the competition. The #1 news magazine on Friday nights. #1 in politics across this historic election versus the competition. The #1 daytime talk show. And #1 in streaming news. ABC News is America's #1 news.
Welcome back. Today, Arkansas became the first state to enact a law that bans gender-affirming treatments and surgery for transgender youth. The measure, passed by both the Arkansas House of Representatives and Senate, comes a day after the governor vetoed the original bill, following calls from healthcare professionals and parents of trans children expressing their concerns. While this may be a first, it is part of a larger pattern of emergency political culture wars over legislation across various states on the topic of transgender youth, whether it be healthcare access or their ability to participate in sports. ABC's Kana Whitworth brings us the latest on the debate of inclusive versus advantage.
I kind of just forget sometimes where I am if I'm running, and it's such a freeing experience.
For 20-year-old college student Lindsay Hecox, running is her life.
It's just such a joy to be able to get out there, forget about whatever was going on in your life that day.
Where would you be without running?
I don't know. I feel like it's a core part of who I am. So it wouldn't really be the same.
It's been Lindsay's outlet since high school.
I did cross country as well and kind of realized this is my thing. I'm good at it, I like it, and I'm gonna continue doing it because I wanted to really get better.
But in high school, Lindsay hadn't yet begun her transition. As she describes it, she presented male, living as many transgender teens do in a body that didn't match her gender identity. It wasn't until college that she sought to live authentically as a woman.
I felt like I wasted a little bit of my life trying to pretend to be a guy and just repressing everything that seems so much better now.
But while she was waiting for tryouts, her chances and her life changed almost in an instant.
House Bills 500 and 509 are no longer bills. They're now law.
In March of 2020, Idaho's House Bill 500, dubbed the Fairness in Women's Sports Act, banned trans girls and women's ability to compete in female sports leagues.
It's about making sure that we preserve those opportunities.
But Lindsay stresses that she's a girl too and should have opportunities to play like anyone else.
I don't know, something about trans women athletes, they feel like it's going to be some huge, tall, muscular superstar. And I don't even think most of my teammates would even think of me as trans. I just look like a regular girl.
Lindsay filed a lawsuit in April 2020 with the help of the ACLU and others. By August, the court placed a preliminary injunction against the law, meaning that while the lawsuit is pending, the law itself could not be enforced. But Idaho laid the groundwork for a spate of exclusionary trans bills that followed across the country. 2021 already seeing the enactment of 3 bills banning trans girls from competing in sports in the month of March alone.
I agree with the purpose of the bill and the intent of it.
I do believe that transgenders participating in women's sports will destroy women's sports.
And in South Dakota, Governor Kristi Noem passing her own executive orders.
It is fundamentally unfair for men to compete in women's sports.
In all, at least 28 states proposing or passing at least 52 bills excluding trans athletes and namely trans girls in K-12 and college. In Minnesota, legislators introducing a bill to make trans female participation in school sports a petty misdemeanor, potentially punishable by a fine.
As a parent, the one thing we cannot do, the one thing, is silence our child's spirit.
Parents of trans children are scared for their futures. Missouri dad Brandon Boulware making an impassioned plea for his daughter who plays volleyball.
I need you to understand that this language, if it becomes law, will have real effects on real people.
According to the CDC, 27% of transgender teens say they feel unsafe at school. 35% have attempted suicide. But some cisgender female athletes, girls whose gender identity match their sex assigned at birth, say they are being displaced and pushed out by transgender athletes.
I know what it's like to be beat by a biological male in my own sport. I've seen them beat some of the fastest girls in this nation.
19-year-old Madison Kenyon, a sophomore runner for Idaho State University, says losing to a trans female in her first collegiate race was discouraging.
We're not here for a participation trophy. We've been working so hard. We've been making so many sacrifices, and we're not just here to participate. We want to compete, and we want to compete on a fair playing field.
18-year-old Chelsea Mitchell says she lost several state titles after racing against 2 trans females in high school. Mitchell finding herself in 3rd place behind the 2 trans athletes.
Personally, I lost 4 state championships, 2 All New England awards, and countless other opportunities to advance to meets and to place. And so I decided to speak out because, I believe that this was unfair for me and my other competitors.
She was able to beat one of the trans runners in later races.
When I was able to win, it was great. I felt like I finally got the recognition I deserved.
Mitchell is currently a scholarship athlete at William & Mary in Virginia. Neither of her trans competitors were offered scholarships. Both Mitchell and Kenyon have joined lawsuits against trans female participation in women's sports and are represented by the Alliance Defending Freedom, a conservative legal advocacy organization. They say it's not about hate or being anti-trans. It's about fairness and opportunity.
Are you worried about the future of female sports?
I think that everyone should have a place to compete, and that if everyone has a right to participate in sports, but the question is, where is that most fair? And for female athletes, it's most fair for biological women to be competing against biological women.
Joanna Harper understands these concerns. As one of the world's leading researchers on transitioning athletes and a trans athlete herself, she says the science around biology and advantages in sports is nuanced.
Many critics of transgender women have suggested that trans women have unfair advantages over cisgender or typical women. And it is certainly true that as a population group, trans women do have athletic advantages over cis women. We do, however, allow advantages in sport.
She says, for example, left-handed baseball players have an advantage over right-handed players in many instances. But most experts agree, no matter the gender assigned at birth, people have a range of athletic abilities.
The evidence that we have seen is that the mitigation that occurs from hormone therapy should be enough to allow trans women and cis women to compete against one another in a meaningful fashion in most sports. I would suggest that it is never the right response to outright ban trans athletes. I think that for all sports, for all levels, there is some set of solutions that can be implemented and still allow trans women to be integrated within women's sport.
While more comprehensive studies need to be done to determine what can be considered a compromise, leading sports organizations have put out guidance based on their understanding of current research. In 2011, the NCAA issued national guidance for trans participation in sports at the collegiate level. It stipulates that before joining a team, trans women should undergo a year of testosterone suppression. Many trans women do hormone replacement therapy, a treatment that, according to the Mayo Clinic, helps individuals match their gender identities to their bodies. Something Hecox did before trying out for her college team in 2020. What has it done for you running?
It's done something that I'm not sure many people really understand, which is that I lost a lot of ability, so muscle.
Like muscle mass?
Yeah, muscle mass, the stamina as well, all decreased.
Really?
I could feel myself getting slower, and I was all right with that.
All right, because she was now within the range of other female athletes. Despite a rigorous training schedule provided by the school, she wasn't fast enough to make the Broncos track team in 2020.
I felt pretty disappointed with my times, actually.
She says she didn't make the team solely based on her performance.
The story that the anti-trans advocates are telling would make people think that LeBron James is going to play on a fourth grade girls basketball team, even though what we're actually talking about are a bunch of kids who are just living them as themselves.
Every single individual is a human. We are all people. We all deserve to be treated with integrity and with respect. And that in this situation, it's about sports.
Hecox is hopeful for an athletic future that includes her and will continue her legal fight, as well as trying out for the team again in 2022.
I don't really mind if I don't make the team as long as I have paved the road for future trans athletes to make a team and be happy.
Kana Whitworth joins us now. Kana, as mentioned earlier, Arkansas became the first state to ban gender-affirming treatments and surgery for trans youth. Doesn't this also complicate things for trans children who may want to play sports?
Well, absolutely, Lindsay. So in some states, that legislation actually makes it a crime to provide this gender-affirming care to anyone under the age of 18. Now, that can greatly complicate someone's transition. It essentially forces them to go through puberty presenting a gender that they don't identify with. Now, the American Academy of Pediatrics is speaking out. They say they highly recommend that young people have access to the appropriate care that they need. And this kind of legislation is being considered by 15 states. And it's important to note, Lindsay, that the CDC says just 2% of high school students identify as transgender. So opponents of this legislation argue that it targets an already marginalized and very small group of people.
And when we're talking about sports, has the NCAA weighed in on any of this?
Well, absolutely, Lindsay. So the president condemning this legislation as well, calling it harmful to transgender student athletes, saying it conflicts with their core values to be inclusive and respectful, also adding that they are committed to hosting championship games in locations that are free of discrimination. Now, Lindsay, people who are pushing for this legislation want to point out that it is not anti-trans. Instead, they are just pushing for an equal playing field.
Kana Whitworth, our thanks to you. Still ahead here on Prime, one of the women who filed a sexual assault lawsuit against Houston Texans quarterback Deshaun Watson reveals her identity, what she claims happened, and the impact on her career as Watson continues to deny all allegations. The U.S. and Iran hold indirect talks over the Iran nuclear deal that the U.S. has withdrawn from, how Iran is now responding. And Kim Kardashian reportedly became a billionaire during the pandemic. We take a look by the numbers, but first, our tweet of the day. Congratulations to the new national champions on the men's basketball side, Baylor University.
I know what happened, and I'm not guilty.
Why the fascination with criminal trials? Figure out what's really out there.
She revealed she had murdered his family.
I know in my heart they did this.
It's the time of suspicion.
The ending's really tough.
You don't know whether truth is going to be difficult to find unless you try to find it.
The reality is our country can collapse from within.
You see the white power movement on the march. Klansmen and neo-Nazis, skinheads, it's meant to incite war.
From the KKK to Oklahoma City to Charlottesville, the new documentary event special.
We just need to start talking about race.
Homegrown hate, the war among us.
This is a real wake-up call.
Streaming now on ABC News Live.
Admit it, these days, what you need to know
seems to change just about every day.
What is it that you really want to know, need to know?
To help you not just get through your day,
but to make the most of it. Feel smarter.
Feel better.
Feel happier.
Well, how about a third hour of Good Morning America in the afternoon?
GMA 3, what you need to know. Lunchtime at 1 Eastern, 12 Central and Pacific on ABC. It's all about you.
Assault on the Capitol, the ABC News original, exclusively on Hulu, now streaming. With so much at stake, so much on the line, more Americans turn here than any other newscast. ABC News World News Tonight with David Muir.
We have made it through another week together.
America's #1 most watched newscast across all of television.
The world may feel out of your control, but your happiness doesn't have to be. Learn the secrets to happiness. Listen to the 10% Happier podcast, free on Apple Podcasts.
Robin Roberts, George Stephanopoulos, Michael Strahan. Wake up with America's #1 most watched morning show. ABC's
Good Morning America.
ABC News honored winner for the second straight year with the Edward R. Murrow Award for overall excellence in television. ABC News, America's #1 news source.
Welcome back, everyone. This past year has, of course, brought economic hardship to so many. Meanwhile, the world's billionaires have collectively gotten richer during the pandemic as the gap between the ultra-wealthy and poor continues to widen. We take a look by the numbers. More than $5 trillion. That's how much the total wealth of the world's billionaires grew in just 1 year, raising their collective net worth to $13 trillion, according to the Forbes annual billionaires list released just today. There are now a record-setting 2,775 billionaires worldwide, including a record 493 new members of the Billionaires Club this year, Kim Kardashian among them. With a net worth of $177 billion, Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos tops the list, followed by Tesla CEO Elon Musk with $151 billion, who skyrocketed from 31st to 2nd place in just 1 year. The U.S. has 724 billionaires, more than any other country, but China is close behind with 698 billionaires. Only 328 of the world's billionaires are women. That's less than 12%, but still an increase from last year. And finally, even amid the pandemic-driven recession, a staggering 86% of all billionaires are richer today than they were a year ago. And we still have lots to get to here on Prime. With evacuation orders still in place, how authorities in Florida feel about the chances of a potential catastrophic leak at a wastewater site, and the state of emergency in one state after nearly 150 fires broke out just this week alone. But first, to look at our top trending stories on abcnews.com.
We will guide you through it all tonight. We have made it through another week together.
Give me a big hug, Griffin.
We tell all our patients how much they're loved. We hold their hands.
David, we're showing our love and support for all the ICU staff.
They're the heroes in this.
Now, when it matters most, the straightforward facts. ABC News is America's #1 news. #1 in the morning, #1 in the evening, with America's most watched newscast. #1 in late night versus the competition. The #1 news magazine on Friday nights. #1 in politics across this historic election versus the competition. The #1 daytime talk show. And #1 in streaming news. ABC News is America's #1 news.
The world may feel out of your control, but your happiness doesn't have to be. Learn the secrets to happiness. Listen to the 10% Happier podcast, free on Apple Podcasts.
ABC News honored winner for the second straight year with the Edward R. Murrow Award for overall excellence in television. ABC News, America's #1 news source.
This is GMA 3, what you need to know. GMA 3.
A third hour of Good Morning America in the afternoon.
It's all about you. Lunchtime on ABC.
The reality is our country can collapse from within.
You see the white power movement on the march. Klansmen and neo-Nazis, skinheads. It's meant to incite war.
From the KKK to Oklahoma City to Charlottesville, the new documentary event special.
We just need to start talking about race.
Homegrown hate, the war among us.
This is a real wake-up call.
Streaming now on ABC News Live.
Friday nights, 9/8 Central. True crime, cinematic, real-life drama, stunning, the unthinkable. Follow the clues. The Hunt. True crime. 2020. Friday nights, 9/8 Central on ABC.
The most powerful stories of our time, anytime. Nightline.
In Minneapolis, prosecutors in Derek Chauvin's murder trial are focusing on the former police officer's training.
Sergeant Kerr Yang, the department's crisis intervention coordinator, testified that the department's policy is to provide aid when needed.
A lot of the time, we have the time to slow things down and reevaluate, reassess.
Lieutenant Johnny Mercel, a use of force expert, shown this picture and making it clear Chauvin crossed a line.
Sir, is this an MPD trained neck restraint?
No, sir.
Has it ever been?
Not to my neck restraint, no, sir.
Meanwhile, Maurice Hall, who was in the car with George Floyd that day, appeared via Zoom. While the defense hopes he will testify, Hall's lawyer argued that he should not have to because of criminal charges that could arise from his testimony and because drugs were found in the car he and Floyd were riding in.
He needs to be held accountable for his actions.
There are new developments tonight in the sex assault lawsuits filed against Houston Texans quarterback Deshaun Watson. Ashley Solis, the first woman to sue Watson, now identifying herself before the cameras today. She's one of at least 22 massage therapists accusing Watson of sexual misconduct, claiming he assaulted her during a therapy session.
I can no longer practice the profession that I love the most without shaking during the session. My hands shake whenever I place them on a client, and I've had to cut the session short.
Police say they are investigating. Watson has denied all allegations.
The emergency has kind of de-escalated.
Families near the site of that toxic wastewater lake near Tampa, Florida, are now going home tonight. Florida officials have lifted the evacuations now. Pumps have siphoned off millions of gallons of that wastewater, reducing the risk of catastrophic flooding. A submersible device will be on site tomorrow looking to plug the actual leak.
There are not concerns on the water quality that EPA and DEP have tested the water. They still feel that it is at pretty safe levels. It's not enough for us to just be patching this up. What is the plan to actually fix this going forward, that this doesn't happen again?
The governor of Wisconsin has declared a state of emergency over wildfire conditions there. Nearly 150 fires breaking out across the state in the past week. State officials report more than 300 fires since the start of the year. The governor's order includes deploying the National Guard if needed. Fire officials are warning of a longer than average fire season.
The U.S. and Iran are holding indirect talks in efforts to revive the nuclear deal.
Though Tehran has ruled out face-to-face negotiations, both the U.S. and Iran are present in Vienna, a development the U.S. has called a healthy step forward. President Trump pulled out of the nuclear deal in 2018 and reimposed sanctions on Iran, but President Biden is hoping to revive the agreement. Iran, China, Russia, France, Germany, and Britain held virtual talks last Friday to see how to move forward. The aim here is to reach an agreement in 2 months.
Black Eyed Peas frontman will.i.am is working on a way to combine his love for music with the public's need to wear masks. The musician has partnered with Honeywell to launch Super Mask. The high-tech face mask contains noise-canceling earbuds, has Bluetooth support, and a HEPA filtration system. It also has a strap to help the mask fit snugly. And get this, 3 dual-speed fans circulate air inside the mask. The mask will cost about $299 for each one. They go on sale Thursday.
That is one fancy mask. Welcome back, everyone. Next, some incredible images of dramatic rescue on the high seas. Our Ian Pannell has more.
Tonight, a daring, dangerous rescue mission on the high seas
A dozen crew members stranded on this Dutch cargo ship in stormy weather off the coast of Norway late Monday after its main engine lost power. Watch as Norwegian rescuers, helmet cams rolling, swoop in by helicopter, plucking most of the crew off the deck and up into the relative safety of the chopper. The vessel, supposed to transport yachts and boats around the world, now listing perilously, tossed around in giant 50-foot waves. This crew member, forced to leap into the rough, frigid surf, the water temperature in the low 40s, lucky and grateful to be alive.
Our thanks to Ian for that. And switching gears now to the #1 song on the Billboard Hot 100 as of today. It's called Montero, Call Me By Your Name by Lil Nas X. Take a listen.
Call me when you want, call me when you need, call me in the morning, I'll be on the way, call me when you want.
That victory to #1 has not come without controversy, as the video's satanic theme and homoerotic displays of affection have caused quite the reaction online and beyond. Joining us now to break it all down as far as the drama for us, the pop culture critic and friend of ABC News Prime, John Murray. John, thank you so much for joining us as always. Now, as you know, despite all the blowback the song received, it's still a hit. What do you think that says about music lovers and pop culture in our country?
You know, Lindsay, whether you love Lil Nas X or you were one of the people shouting, Jesus, take the wheel, as of this broadcast, 100 million people have watched this video and its concepts on YouTube. And as you mentioned, it's #1 on the pop charts. This was a satirical take on a theme that Lil Nas X said tormented him his whole life. The Christians who told him that he was going to live in hell. So he wanted to turn hell back towards them and say, listen, I actually went there. And he took these themes, he created this CGI video with this song, and whether they loved it or they hate it, people are paying attention to it. And he's either laughing all the way to the bank or he's sliding down that pole like he did in the video. Either way, he's having success from this, Lindsay.
Rolling Stone called the video unabashedly queer, and with the release of the song, Lil Nas X also attached a letter to his 14-year-old self, which read in part, "This is very scary for me. People will be angry. They will say I'm pushing an agenda, but the truth is I am. The agenda to make people stay out of other people's lives and stop dictating who they should be, sending you love from the future." How big of a moment is this when it comes to black queer men in particular in the music industry?
Well, you know, Lindsay, in the 70s and 80s, there was an artist named Sylvester. He was probably the only real black out gay man that was having commercial success in the music industry. Since then, I could probably really only name about a few people that have been able to have commercial success. You have Frank Ocean in the hip hop space, R&B singer Rasan Patterson, and then you have the pop performance artist Todrick Hall. Those are the only out gay men that I can think of that are really having commercial success. So Lil Nas X is showing that he's somebody who already broke through once as a hybrid hip hop country singer, and that in itself was controversial when he first came out. And now he is opening a door for other artists who can, and particularly black gay artists who can live in their truth and have commercial success. It's a groundbreaking moment, and he's using art to provoke a conversation in many aspects. And that's what good art should do. It should generate dialogue. It should have you thinking and really looking at what has not happened in the music industry up until now.
And for those in the older generation who may be clutching their pearls as they watch this video, would you say that this is something that we've seen before in the way that Madonna or other artists have really pushed the envelope in the past?
Yes, Lindsay. Look, anybody who was watching the Isley Brothers versus Earth, Wind & Fire versus last weekend was probably cringing a little bit with this Lil Nas X video. But I do believe that this is a page out of the Madonna sexual provocateur religious themed playbook. This is a modern day adaptation of that theme. And I think what he's done is he's done it effective. He's brought a contemporary element to this to a generation who may not have known or learned or read about when Madonna was being cast to hell for the very themes that she had in songs like a Virgin and some of the images that she was depicting on her tours.
I'm going to throw a little curveball at you. Who do you think that Lil Nas X should collaborate with next, and why?
You know, after this video, I think, you know, and after the song, Lindsay, there's so many other provocateurs, you know, iconoclasts, disruptors in music. So whether he collaborates with a Madonna or Grace Jones, Elton John, a Cher, anybody who has lived in their authentic truth and are pushing boundaries and are evoking emotions and conversations, making people uncomfortable through their art as a way to generate awareness and also have success, those would be great collaborators for Lil Nas X.
John Murray, thanks so much for keeping us hip and up to date. We appreciate it.
Hip is what I do, Lindsay.
Thank you. If you've been inside a grocery store recently, you may have noticed prices are on the rise. But why and what can you do to keep costs down? Rebecca Jarvis has more.
Sticker shock at checkout. Whether you're buying your groceries and other staples online or in stores, it's not your imagination. Costs are climbing.
We had a suspicion that prices were going to go up, but I don't think we realized how bad it was going to be.
According to the latest government data, the price U.S. consumers pay for groceries is up 3.5% over the last 12 months. For a family of four, that could be as much as $500 more a year on everything from cereal to dairy to meats and eggs. And analysts say on top of the pandemic, truck driver shortages, severe storms, and other occurrences like the ship stuck in the Suez Canal are only exacerbating the problem.
I don't think anybody realized, you know, the magnitude of issues that we're seeing within the supply chain right now.
A growing list of popular consumer companies recently hiking prices. General Mills, maker of Cheerios, announcing it's raising prices to offset higher freight, manufacturing, and commodity prices. Hormel raising prices on products like Jennie-O ground turkey in light of higher grain costs. Even the cost of a jar of Jif peanut butter higher than a year ago because maker J.M. Smucker says its costs are meaningfully higher. But experts say there are ways to keep your shopping costs low. Stock up and strike when the price is right.
You've got to think about what you routinely use. And if you see it on sale, you certainly need to buy it in bulk.
And think outside the box. Shop around for items on sale. And don't forget smaller stores.
Our thanks to Rebecca for those tips. And before we go tonight, our image of the day. With so much going on in the world and after last year's delay, some may need a reminder that the Olympics are set to take place this summer. This image of a former figure skater carrying the torch reminds us of the hard work athletes around the world are doing right now to prepare. And that is our show for this hour. Be sure to stay tuned to ABC News Live for more context and analysis of the day's top stories. Thank you so much for streaming with us. Coming up in the next hour, we're staying on top of a few things. The heartbreaking images from the southern border, a Border Patrol agent encountering a migrant boy in tears. And the medical miracle, the life-changing surgery for one woman who nearly lost her life to an asthma attack. Stay with us.
Now, when it matters most, the straightforward facts. ABC News is America's #1 news. #1 in the morning, #1 in the evening, with America's most watched newscast. #1 in late night versus the competition. The #1 news magazine on Friday nights. #1 in politics across this historic election versus the competition. The #1 daytime talk show. And #1 in streaming news. ABC News is America's #1 news.
The most powerful stories of our time, anytime. Nightline.
Friday nights, 9/8 Central. True crime, cinematic, real-life drama, stunning, the unthinkable. Follow the clues. The Hunt. True crime. 2020. Friday nights, 9/8 Central on ABC.
Admit it. These days, what you need to know
seems to change just about every day.
What is it that you really want to know, need to know?
To help you not just get through your day,
but to make the most of it. Feel smarter.
Feel better.
Feel happier.
Well, how about a third hour of Good Morning America in the afternoon?
GMA 3, what you need to know. Lunchtime at 1 Eastern, 12 Central and Pacific on ABC. It's all about you.
I know what happened, and I'm not guilty.
Why the fascination with criminal trials? Figure out what's really out there.
She revealed she had murdered his family.
I know in my heart they did this.
It's the time of suspicion.
The ending's really tough.
You don't know whether truth is going to be difficult to find unless you try to find it.
The reality is our country can collapse from within.
You see the white power movement on the march. Klansmen and neo-Nazis, skinheads, it's meant to incite war.
From the KKK to Oklahoma City to Charlottesville, the new documentary event special.
We just need to start talking about race.
Homegrown hate, the war among us.
This is a real wake-up call.
Streaming now on ABC News Live.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thank you so much for streaming with us. We are monitoring several developments here at ABC News at this hour. Are we in the middle of a spring surge? Deaths are on the rise in 21 states, cases rising in 19. In Michigan, the new U.S. epicenter, 70% of cases have been linked to that highly contagious UK variant. Most of the infected and young and unvaccinated. President Biden moved up his deadline for states to make all adults eligible for the vaccine to April 19th. An investigation is now underway in Maryland after a Navy medic allegedly opened fire near Fort Detrick. One person is in critical condition. Police say the gunman then drove to the base, drove around guards, and got a half-mile into the base before he was shot and killed. And some positive news. The IMF is projecting a growth rate for the U.S. economy of 6.4% this year. That rapid growth is the fastest since 1984, and it's being fueled by vaccinations and Biden's stimulus plan, according to experts. Global growth is expected to also be around 6% this year. Now to day 7 of the Derek Chauvin trial, and an increasing number of Chauvin's former colleagues who have now taken the stand to testify against him. We've now heard from 9 officers on the Minneapolis police force, including the police chief. This comes as the defense is trying to establish doubt over how Floyd died and whether Chauvin was influenced by a hostile environment. Alex Perez reports.
Prosecutors today building a wall of police witnesses, trying to convince the jury former officer Derek Chauvin used excessive force against George Floyd and failed to help him when he became unresponsive. Sergeant Kerr Yang, who leads the department's crisis intervention training, testifies Chauvin was taught to de-escalate crises. He took a 40-hour course in 2016.
A lot of the time, we have the time to slow things down and reevaluate, reassess.
Lieutenant Johnny Mercel, a use of force expert, shown this picture and making it clear Chauvin crossed a line.
Sir, is this an MPD trained neck restraint?
No, sir.
Has it ever been?
Not to my neck restraint, no, sir.
Once a subject is under control and no longer resistant, it's inappropriate to hold them in a position where you're draping your knee across their back or neck, isn't it?
I would say it's time to de-escalate for us, sir.
Officer Nicole McKenzie coordinates medical support services for the department. Prosecutors using her to counter the defense argument. Chauvin wouldn't have known Floyd was in distress because he was still talking.
There is a possibility that somebody could be in respiratory distress and still being able to verbalize it. Just because they're speaking doesn't mean they're breathing adequately.
The defense team argues the crowd that gathered around the officers created a distraction and a threat.
Have you ever had to perform emergency services in not even a hostile crowd, just a loud, excited crowd?
Yes.
Is that, in your experience, more or less difficult?
It's incredibly difficult.
Does it make it more likely that you may miss signs that a patient is experiencing something?
Yes.
9 Minneapolis police witnesses have already testified against Chauvin, including the department's chief, Madera Arredondo.
But you know, Lord,
Today, Floyd's family praying outside the court, closely following every second of the proceedings. His brother sounding confident they'll get justice.
My family, we have the faith. After we get the verdict and we get this conviction, we'll be able to breathe.
Our thanks to Alex for that. And for more analysis, we bring in criminal defense attorney and former Chicago police officer, Mr. Daniel Herbert. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's start with a very general question. How much do you think that today's prosecution witnesses helped the state's case, and in particular their burden to prove that this wasn't just unauthorized but amounted to murder?
Today was a very good day for the prosecution. The witnesses that they called, they're really going to go a long way to help the prosecution prove that Mr. Chauvin committed a murder. Essentially, the prosecution has proven that the actions that Mr. Chauvin committed were not authorized, which allows the prosecutors to argue that since they were not authorized acts, then Mr. Chauvin's intent was not to properly detain an arrestee, but rather to commit a felony, and in this case, that would be assault, which would get him to that second-degree murder conviction that they're seeking.
Now, you've defended police officers. You've been one yourself. Is it a strong defense to argue that a real-life situation can look very differently than a training exercise, especially in cases like this one?
Well, it's a good question, Lindsay. I mean, there's no question that that video is different than what the actual human eye is seeing. Video, in its nature, is two-dimensional. It distorts images. It doesn't properly show distances. And importantly, in this case, it doesn't accurately depict the level of resistance that's being utilized. However, jurors right now are conditioned to believe that video is very strong, compelling, and accurate evidence. And I think it's going to take a lot of time for us as defense lawyers to accurately show that video does depict things in certain critical ways.
So you would maintain essentially that you can't necessarily trust what your eyes are seeing?
Yeah, in a lot of situations, the video is rarely, sometimes there's not audio. It's rarely taken from the perspective of the officer that's the defendant in this case. And there are certain inherent flaws with video. Now, that being said, this video is relatively clear, and it's a situation where distance and images being distorted aren't that big of an issue here.
The defense also argues that the crowd of bystanders, that they were distracting and threatening to Derek Chauvin. Do you buy that? Do you think that a jury will?
I don't, and I don't necessarily believe that the jury will. The defense clearly has to explain why this detention, and more importantly, the submission and the use of force lasted for over 9 minutes. And really the only way that they have found a way to do that is by saying that the crowd was somehow distorting Mr. Chauvin's perception and distorting or impacting his fear. I don't think it's going to be very compelling here because, as I've said, the video shows that this was anything but an out-of-control situation other than for the acts of Officer Chauvin in this case and his fellow officers.
Mr. Herbert, appreciate your insight. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
As of today, nearly 19,000 unaccompanied migrant children are in the custody of the U.S. government. And while the Biden administration continues its scramble to open up facilities to shelter these children, the reality of the dangers they face along their journey here is something that most Americans most likely couldn't even fathom. ABC's Matt Gutman brings us a look at just one of the tiny faces behind this massive humanitarian crisis.
Tonight, the fear etched on that 10-year-old's face and the hurt in his voice. Can you help me? He asks a Border Patrol agent who found the little boy, that solitary figure wandering on a barren field near the U.S.-Mexico border in southern Texas. Through the tears, the boy explains he wasn't traveling with his mom or dad. He was abandoned, ditched, in his words, by the migrant group he was traveling with. Sobbing, the boy telling the agent he was scared of getting robbed or worse, kidnapped. Thankfully, he was found by authorities and taken to this child detention center in Donna, Texas. We just returned from Texas after flying over that very same facility, now rapidly expanding to handle the thousands of additional migrant children and teens expected. ABC News has learned there are now over 19,000 migrant children in federal custody. And the Donna facility recently so crowded that children were forced to take turns sleeping on the floor.
And those facilities becoming more crowded by the day. Matt Gutman joins us now from LA County, where officials are setting up a massive new facility for these children. And Matt, you're also learning more about that little boy tonight. What's the latest you can tell us about him?
Lindsay, Border Patrol officials assure us that that boy is now safe. They say that he is being processed through the system, and eventually he is going to be transferred over to family members here in the U.S. But on average, this is a process that is taking over 5 weeks, 37 days. So it could be that this little boy still has a very long road ahead of him. Lindsay.
Matt Gutman, our thanks to you. It was a brief comment from President Biden, but the White House is still getting pushed to explain his support for Major League Baseball moving its All-Star game from Georgia. Why did he get involved? Our Karen Travers has more.
Major League Baseball is shifting its All-Star game from Georgia to Colorado, a decision made in response to the new election law passed by Georgia Republicans last month. President Biden last week said he supported moving the game out of Atlanta. The White House is still facing questions about why he got involved.
I think it's a very tough decision for a corporation to make or a group to make, but I respect them when they make that judgment.
Losing the All-Star game will mean significant economic losses for Georgia, a state that helped propel the president to the White House and gave Democrats the majority in the Senate. The White House again insisting it was not calling for companies to boycott the state.
When they, in fact, move out of Georgia, the people who need the help the most, people who are making hourly wages, sometimes get hurt the most.
The Georgia law limits ballot drop boxes, tightens ID requirements for mail-in voting, and makes it a crime for anyone other than a poll worker to offer food and water to voters waiting in line. Railing against the new law, President Biden has said repeatedly and incorrectly that it ends voting at 5 p.m. Asked if the president will change the way he speaks about the law, the White House would not explicitly acknowledge he was wrong.
Fundamentally, the president doesn't believe it should be made harder to vote. He believes it should be easier.
The White House did point out that the new home of the All-Star game, Colorado, has long been a leading state in vote by mail. 94% of residents there voted by mail in the 2020 election. Karen Travers for ABC News.
Our thanks to Karen for that. And now to a major medical breakthrough. Doctors in New York completed the first successful trachea transplant in January. Our Will Reeve caught up with the recipient of that trachea to see how she's doing now 3 months later.
6 years ago, 57-year-old Sonia Sain suffered a life-threatening asthma attack. ER doctors in the Bronx forced to intubate her, in the process damaging her vocal cords and her trachea, essential for speaking, breathing, and normal lung function. Sonia was left with a windpipe that was damaged and scarred. She had trouble breathing, and every time she went to bed, she feared she would suffocate. Today, medical procedures have left her with a temporary hole in her windpipe she needs to cover in order to speak.
I think I lived more in the hospital than I did at home. I wasn't able to do running, going to the beach, laughing, dancing.
All these things that make life worth living, you couldn't do.
I started putting paperwork in to just go into hospice for them to let me just go in peace.
There's thousands of people that die every year because of these defects in their airway, and we have struggled for well over half a century to try to find a way to remedy it.
After years of work, Mount Sinai head and neck surgeon Dr. Eric Gendon developed that remedy, a trachea transplant. It had never been done successfully because doctors couldn't get blood to flow to the new organ. Until now. Sonia jumped at the chance to be the first ever trachea transplant recipient.
And I told him I only want 5 minutes to breathe. 5 minutes, that's it.
To you, the simplest thing, the most essential thing, you just wanted 5 minutes of it.
If you can give me 5 minutes of me getting that good breath in You've made my life complete.
The phone call came in January. They had found a donor.
I told my daughters we need to drop on our knees. I said we gotta thank the family and the donor because they're giving back your mother.
With 50 people involved over 18 hours, Sonia went in for surgery on January 13th.
There were many, many opportunities for things not to go well. It's kind of like all the stars aligned to get this done. So it was really a very, very special 18 hours.
When Sonia woke up, she was breathing and overcome with emotion.
Did breathing in that oxygen like you had wished for years feel even better than you imagined?
It was, oh yeah. It felt like the whole universe just went inside of me and said, here, accept it. And I was just so happy.
Now, 3 months later, Sonia is doing great. Her body showing no signs of rejection, and doctors will soon close up the hole in her neck so she can speak freely.
She has paved the way for thousands of patients who really had no hope. It was her bravery and her belief in us to step forward and do this.
There's just one thing left for Sonia to do.
All I want to do is walk on the beach. Because they told me I could never do it again. I want to be able to just walk and say, see, I did it.
So good to see her dancing again. Our thanks to Will. And still to come, our Amy Robach sits down with Evelyn Yang, wife of former presidential candidate who is currently running for mayor of New York City. A revealing conversation about overcoming the pain of sexual abuse.
With so much at stake, so much on the line, more Americans turn here than any other newscast. ABC News World News Tonight with David Muir.
We have made it through another week together.
America's #1 most watched newscast across all of television.
Admit it, these days, what you need to know
seems to change just about every day.
What is it that you really want to know, need to know?
To help you not just get through your day,
but to make the most of it. Feel smarter.
Feel better.
Feel happier.
Well, how about a third hour of Good Morning America in the afternoon?
GMA 3, what you need to know. Lunchtime at 1 Eastern, 12 Central and Pacific on ABC. It's all about you.
Robin Roberts, George Stephanopoulos, Michael Strahan. Wake up with America's #1 most watched morning show. ABC's
Good Morning America.
The world may feel out of your control, but your happiness doesn't have to be. Learn the secrets to happiness. Listen to the 10% Happier podcast, free on Apple Podcasts.
ABC News honored winner for the second straight year with the Edward R. Murrow Award for Overall Excellence in Television. ABC News, America's #1 news source. Friday nights, 9/8 Central. True crime, cinematic, real-life drama, stunning, the unthinkable. Follow the clues. The Hunt. True crime. 2020. Friday nights, 9/8 Central on ABC.
The reality is our country can collapse from within.
You see the white power movement on the march. Klansmen and neo-Nazis, skinheads, it's meant to incite war.
From the KKK to Oklahoma City to Charlottesville, the new documentary event special.
We just need to start talking about race.
Homegrown hate, the war among us.
This is a real wake-up call.
Streaming now on ABC News Live.
Now, when it matters most, the straightforward facts. ABC News is America's #1 news. #1 in the morning, #1 in the evening, with America's most watched newscast. #1 in late night versus the competition. The #1 news magazine on Friday nights. #1 in politics across this historic election versus the competition. The #1 daytime talk show. And #1 in streaming news. ABC News is America's #1 news.
Welcome back. We're tracking several international headlines at this hour, including the dramatic rescue of crew members on a Dutch cargo ship. A dozen stranded on the ship in stormy weather off Norway after its main engine lost power. Helmet cameras capture the unbelievable images of the crew being pulled from the deck. Some of the crew members were forced to leap into frigid waters before being pulled to safety. Iran is calling the indirect talks with the U.S. over reviving the Iran nuclear deal, quote, constructive. All original members of the deal met in Vienna, although the U.S. and Iran did not meet face-to-face. President Trump removed the U.S. from the deal back in 2018, and since then, Iran has upped its uranium enrichment. Both sides appear to be working to cool off tensions. And in Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been asked to once again form a new government that could extend his term in office. He has 6 weeks to make a deal in the wake of that nation's fourth inconclusive election in the past 2 years, or Israelis may be forced back to the ballot box again. April is National Sexual Assault Awareness and Prevention Month, and the statistics for sexual abuse in America are staggering, especially for children. 1 in 9 girls and 1 in 53 boys under the age of 18 experience sexual abuse or assault at the hands of an adult, according to the Journal of Adolescent Health. So our Amy Robach recently spoke to Evelyn Yang, wife of New York City mayoral candidate Andrew Yang. She's publishing a new children's book aimed at helping parents and educators talk about sexual abuse. And she discusses her own painful experience and the 30-year-old memories the trauma unearthed.
You revealed last year that you had been sexually abused by your doctor, by your OBGYN back in 2012.
Right.
What made you come forward last year? Obviously, it's a difficult, scary thing to do, to go public, but why?
Well, at the time, my husband was running for president, and I suddenly had this national platform, and women started to open up to me and share their stories about being sexually harassed, being sexually assaulted. And every time I would get a letter, I would think to myself, you are so brave. I hear you. And I also have this experience. I felt like I needed to share what happened to me so that other women would feel empowered to come forward as well.
Sexual abuse is not a comfortable subject, and so you wrote a children's book. It's called A Kid's Book About Sexual Abuse. Why is this book so important? Why did it need to be written?
I was reflecting on how I had just shared an enormous secret with basically the world, and I realized I did not explain to my own children what sexual abuse even is. 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys will be abused before they're 18. And given how shocking those numbers are, we should be having this conversation with our children much earlier. But I also know that it's incredibly difficult to approach this subject. Even for me as a survivor, I struggled with how do I present this information in a way that was going to be not scary or overwhelming for kids.
Not only are you a survivor, but you're a mother. And so the education needs to start young so kids don't feel that fear or even that shame. Talk about why kids need to learn about this at an early age.
I think my book is about abuse as much as it is about empowerment. The way we approach the subject almost all the time is reactive. We don't talk about it until something terrible happens. And then that's a lot to unpack in the moment. So to be able to get in front of it in a more positive way should be the goal.
When you shared your story and relived your story, it triggered another memory. And I know you haven't spoken about this, but you remembered another instance of sexual abuse as a child. Can you give us an idea of what happened to you as a young girl?
So the assault itself did trigger some memories, but what was interesting about that memory is I didn't make the connection fully until I testified against my doctor before a grand jury. It was in that moment on the stand that I suddenly felt like a small, terrified, paralyzed child. And I realized I've been here before. 93% of the time with children, it's someone you know. For me, it was a stranger, and it was at school. I had an instinct that there was something off. Before the assault, he was being very friendly. And I think I was a little bit off guard because it was at school. And I distinctly remember telling myself, don't be rude. I don't want to hurt his feelings. I was very lucky that a teacher or an adult staff member discovered us and intervened. So he was arrested and prosecuted, and I was called upon to testify against him.
You're revealing for the first time about this childhood abuse, this childhood incident. Mm-hmm. What was the reaction from your friends and family? How many people actually even know about what happened to you?
I haven't told anyone. Really, I haven't talked about it. I don't think I think probably a handful of people know.
What do you think their reaction is going to be?
You know, I'm curious if it's been a repressed memory for others in my family as well.
Nobody talked about it?
No, you know, and I think it's an uncomfortable topic. So I remember leaving the courthouse and not really talking about it again.
It's remarkable, actually, and documented, so you know it happened.
Yeah. Yes. I think it also speaks to the trauma that people carry when they experience something like this. It's so powerful that your mind works to bury it, basically. It's incredibly difficult and overwhelming to talk about this subject. It's one of the reasons why I was inspired to write a book, to help families process. Whether it happened or not, we should be talking about it. But it's so difficult. It's such a sensitive topic, and when parents and educators don't have tools, then you're much less likely to engage.
What would your book have done for you had there been one like it when you were young?
I think about sometimes if I hadn't been that lucky and a teacher hadn't intervened, and what I have told, I'm not sure, and that sends chills up my spine, because to carry that burden for years, like so many people do, so many people are walking around with this burden of sexual abuse and sexual violence, and they haven't talked about it.
Have you read the book with your sons?
I haven't. They know that I've been working on a book, and as a result, we talk about sexual abuse in our family all the time.
You're talking about it.
Yes, I think this is the goal. We need to be normalizing these conversations around sexual abuse at a much earlier age. We're taught how to cross the street safely, how to say no to drugs, what to do in the event of a house fire. And statistically, children are more likely to be sexually abused than to be in a house fire, but yet we don't talk about it until it happens.
Such an important conversation to talk about. Our thanks to Amy Robach for that. A kid's book about sexual abuse is now available for pre-order. All author profits will benefit RAIN, the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network. If you or someone you know has been affected by sexual violence, free confidential support is available at 800-656-HOPE or online via chat at online.rain.org. Finally tonight, it's the pandemic-fueled shortage no one saw coming. Ketchup is running in short supply, not the kind in the bottle, but the small little packets that are usually in restaurants. According to USA Today, Kraft Heinz is working to increase supply. So if you order a hamburger or a hot dog at a restaurant and they say they don't have any ketchup, perhaps some other condiment will have to do for now. That is our show for this hour. Be sure to stay tuned to ABC News Live for more context and analysis of the day's top stories. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us, and have a great night.